Welcome to The Run Out, a brand new podcast for all things lacrosse. I am your host, Neil Barrett, and whether you are a seasoned player, a passionate fan, or you just found the fastest game on 2 feet for the first time, you are in the right place. The Run Out is a weekly podcast covering all aspects of the college and pro games. I'm trying to get into the women's game as well, but I'm brand new to that, so bear with me on that. We will have interviews with players, coaches, industry professionals, everyone that you can think of. But most importantly, I want to give you, the listener, a voice in the discussion. So make sure that you subscribe so that you do not miss an episode and you are always caught up with the conversation. For those of you that don't know me, like I said in the intro, my name is Neil Barrett. I have played, coached, and otherwise been involved with the game for a little over 20 years now. I really am that old, as much as I don't want to admit it. I run a lacrosse-related YouTube channel that some of you guys may be watching this on. It's been rebranded several times, but it's the same channel. I used to run a podcast called The Lax Nerds back when podcasting was pretty brand new. We were one of the only ones out there. I think The Lax Nerds was one of less than 10 lacrosse podcasts out at the time. I have written articles for Lacrosse All-Stars, lacrosse.com, and other platforms out there in the lacrosse space. And I have even worked for a lacrosse manufacturer. So while I don't think I'm special, I have covered the game from just about every angle imaginable. So I do feel like I have some insights. And I know that you're probably thinking, great, another podcast, just what we need, whatever. Everybody has one these days. But like I said, I had Lax Nerds and it was such a blast and I loved doing it. And it got to the point where me and my co-host just couldn't get on the same page, which sounds really bad. We didn't have any issues. He just was married and had kids, and he lived in Maryland and I lived in North Carolina, and it was just hard to literally, get on the same page and meet and stuff. But pretty much from the moment that podcast ended, I wanted to get back into the podcast space. But I just wasn't sure how to go about it. And it finally got to the point where I said, if I don't just do it, I'm never gonna do it. So here I am with a new show. Hopefully you guys are into this and we can do something really fun and cool with it. I'm really looking forward to it. For those of you that have followed me since, Arby's runs on Instagram Live back in the day, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for checking this out. And I am so excited to see where we can take this. Now that the introductions are done, let's get into some lacrosse news. And there was no bigger story this week in the world of lacrosse than the Denver Outlaws trading the 3rd overall pick in this upcoming 2025 PLL draft and a 2nd round pick in next year's 2026 PLL draft in exchange for Pat Kavanaugh from the Boston Cannons. First things first, welcome back to the land of insane trades. It feels like it's been a really long time since we got this level of kind of an insane trade. There was the Chris Gray trade last year, which definitely kind of came out of the blue. I don't think people were expecting that, but something about that even didn't feel quite to this level. I think maybe this would, I feel like you might have to go back to maybe the Rob Pennell trade or Paul Rabel trade. I think both of those were in the summer or the off season before the 2021 season to get this level of like high level player, switching kind of out of the blue. I don't know that anyone was expecting the Boston Cannons to trade away their 1st round draft pick and last year's Tewaaraton winner after one summer of play. It's crazy, but that being said, I don't know that anyone's all that surprised because Pat spent a little bit of the beginning of last season injured, and then when he came back, they never quite figured out how to use him correctly. I think it's really tough because Pat is a bit of a ball dominant guy. He doesn't play a ton off ball. I guess he can, but I think it was a tough adjustment to go from being, a Tewaaraton level player, capable of leading a team, to being probably the third, maybe fourth option on a roster, and not having the ball in his stick very often. Especially they brought him in and he was playing a lot out of the box, and I don't think he was getting about a handful of touches a game. So, Boston never quite figured out how to use him. So it's one of those trades that sounds really crazy, but then you kind of think about it and you're like, well, I get it. And the idea that the Outlaws at number 3 were going to get someone better than Pat Cav is a little bit of, I think, why they made the trade. I think they looked at Pat Kavanaugh as someone that was better than anyone else they were going to get at number 3. So in that instance, it was worth the trade, at least on paper. We don't know who will go at 3, number 1, obviously. On paper, again, at least there's no one better in this upcoming class available at number 3 than what you are probably going to get out of Pat Kavanaugh. I do have to admit that I am not the biggest Pat Kavanaugh fan. I shouldn't say that. But let me clarify. It's not so much about Pat Kavanaugh, who I think is a very good player. I don't know that his game translates super well to the PLL. But it has a lot more, I think, to do with Notre Dame offensive players, and just I don't think that they translate as well to the pro game. I think the best player that's come out of Notre Dame is Matt Kavanaugh, and I'm including Pat in that conversation. I think Matt was a better player than Pat, and even he has not lit the league on fire. He's been a great pro, way better than I'll ever be. I'm not hating on him. I am not suggesting that he and or Pat aren't good players, can't be good players, won't be good players. I'm just saying that they are not the players that you are building a team around. They are very important players. I tend to think of those two guys as the same way that the Archers look at Mac O'Keefe. It's a very important piece. Definitely one of the more important pieces of their offense, but he's not the guy. He's not Tom Schreiber or Grant Amen. He's not even, I don't even think he's Connor Fields. He's down the pecking order, but he is very important to them. And there's a reason that they didn't win until they got him. He's an important part. So I tend to think of both the Kavanaughs as those kind of players, which is great. And there's no shame in that. I'm not hating on either of them. But I just don't think that their games translate. And I'll be more than happy to be wrong. If in 10 years, Pat Kavanaugh has broken every record in the book, I will be the first to hold up my hands and say that I was wrong. I just don't think I am. But as for how the Outlaws could use Pat Kavanaugh, I tend to think that Eric Law is still your guy at X. But with one caveat to that, Eric Law tends to play a lot more in front of the goal, even from X. Like, they start a motion and he moves and kind of backdoors to the front side of the cage. I think that Pat Kavanaugh could technically be the right side attackman, but that will most often, or could most often, look like him getting the ball in that position and carrying it to X to start his dodging, because he did a lot of that at Notre Dame, he either started at X or started out left and then kind of carried the ball to X to dodge. I think you could see a good amount of that with Eric Law kind of mirroring him. They could obviously also just play him out on the right. He's predominantly a left-handed player. I don't know that that's the best fit, but it is technically possible. And then obviously they could run him out of the box. Boston did that to not a ton of success, but I also don't know that the Outlaws have that kind of main initiator from the midfield, whereas maybe the Cannons do. Maybe they don't. I don't know. But I think coming out of the box is not the best position for him. The one, again, kind of caveat to that would be that if they kind of liked what they were getting out of their attack line last year and they think maybe they can keep it together and just try and add Pat Cav into the offense, they could run him out of the box. I don't know that it stays that way for the entirety of the season. I'm pretty sure that you'd rather have Pat Kavanaugh, Eric Law, and Brennan O'Neill on that line than putting Cross Ferrara or anyone else in those three positions. So I don't know that it stays that way in the long term, but at least you could kind of slowly ease him in and start kind of maybe figuring out what that offense looks like. But he will be in camp for the whole camp this year, which is one of the things that he wasn't in last year for the Cannons. He was not in camp. And so I think that it added a little bit to some of the difficulty they had with working him in. And that won't be present with the Outlaws. They will get him right in and be able to kind of figure out a system. So that should help him. I expect to see him on that attack line somewhere. But all that to say, it is possible that he could run out of the box. The last point that I want to make as a Duke fan, as a Brennan O'Neill guy, it is crazy to see these two on the same team. They felt like they were just going to be eternally, meeting up for victories and championships and stuff, and just constantly being, the rock in the other one's path. So to see them on the same team is crazy. 2025 is going to be nuts. What a time to be alive. These two, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. Honestly, this trade kind of came out of nowhere and surprised all of us. And it was all anyone was talking about for about 36 hours. So it is going to be interesting to see. Pretty much from the moment that the dust settled on the Pat Kavanaugh trade, everyone kind of thought, what does this mean for Logan Wisnauskas? And I think a lot of people didn't realize that Logan Wisnauskas is actually a free agent. So the Outlaws are not actually in control of what his future is. I think there's maybe a decent chance that he doesn't come back. He has, when Coach Torpy left High Point University and moved to Brown, Logan Wisnauskas went with him. He had been an assistant coach with High Point and is now an assistant coach at Brown. So coming off that injury last year, it's possible that he just decides that he doesn't want to play and he's going to focus in on coaching. I'm not sure that I would expect that. I think most people would expect to see him back on a PLL field this year, or at least trying. If he can't make it or whatever, that's one thing. But I think most people are going to expect to see him on the field. And so then the question becomes: he's not going to re-sign with the Outlaws. Where will Logan Wisnauskas end up? I think you can make a case for several teams. I've heard a lot of people talking about the Whip Snakes. That is certainly an option. I think we can all see him there. He has the Maryland connection. The left side of their attack is technically up for grabs. I don't know that anyone really fully grasped that position over last season, though there are a few names that would be vying for that position. Levi Anderson is one. Jackson Morrill, I think is still with them. So there are a few guys that could lay a claim to that, but I don't know that we would say that anyone has claimed it yet. So it's certainly a possibility. I tend to think that the best fit for him is probably the Boston Cannons. I think Asher Nolting at X, Marcus Holman out on the right, and Logan Wisnauskas out on the left, with Logan more or less mirroring Marcus Holman would be absolutely insane, because I don't know how you stop that three. Maybe you say that their midfield is probably the weak spot of that offense, and so maybe you can kind of, say, all right, you guys beat us, and we'll try and clamp down those three. But I think you could make a legitimate argument that Logan Wisnauskas on that Boston Cannons is the most complete attack line. There's a few teams that are probably vying for that, but I think that's the most complete. Another dark horse team that I have is the Carolina Chaos, but Josh Byrne has that left hand spot down. Pretty much on lock. They're not uprooting Josh Byrne, so he would have to play somewhere else. And I don't know that they do that they even would want to do that. But it's not a crazy idea. That team clearly needs some offensive help, and Logan Wisnauskas would be a good add for that. So there's a few places, like I said, I think Boston is probably the best fit, but we'll see. We'll see what he does. And speaking of the Boston Cannons, what do they do now that they have the 3rd and 4th pick in the first round of the upcoming 2025 PLO draft? The way I see it, they kind of have 3 options. One is the easiest. They just use the picks to make themselves better. In the offseason last year, they addressed their defense. They brought over Garrett Epple and Bryce Young and kind of locked down those 3. I think the attack is probably pretty set. I think they're either going to roll with Matt Kavanaugh and then Asher and Marcus, or maybe make a play for Logan Wisnauskas and roll those 3 out. That looks pretty set. If you're asking me, I think their defensive midfield is pretty solid as well. And I don't think that there are a lot of Fogos in this draft, certainly not anyone that you're going to draft at 3 and 4 in the first round. So for me, the 2 picks would be best used to kind of strengthen, at least add depth to that midfield. So maybe you go for guys like Coulter Mackesy and Sam English, that should be available right there at 3 and 4, with everyone pretty much assuming that CJ Curse and Chris Kavanaugh are 1 and 2. I think they would add a lot of depth and instantly make that midfield so much more dynamic. And would take some of the stress off of Marcus Holman and Asher Nolting, and could really be what pushes them over the edge. They could also, split those picks, maybe take one of those guys or someone else they deem, and then grab a poll. I'm actually a little behind on who the polls are. The only one I know of is, I think, Sam Alexo from Syracuse, maybe. I'm really bad at polls. But anyway, that is obviously an option if you kind of want to balance out what you're picking. Maybe even look at an attackman that could ultimately replace a Matt Kavanaugh or even a Marcus Holman down the line, and you go grab like an Andrew McAdory or somebody. But using the 2 picks is the easiest thing. The next thing, though, I think it makes less sense, is to trade back for draft capital. They could trade one of those picks, try and get another pick maybe next year, or just move back and get 2 or 3 picks. Maybe not 3. 3 is a bit much, but they could trade back and try and multiply what they have in order to, again, kind of flesh out that roster, or again, maybe even use it for trades down the line. So that's certainly an option, although it seems a little less likely. And then probably the most intriguing, the most fascinating one to talk about would be trading up and trying to get one of the bigger names, again, namely CJ Kirst and or Chris Kavanaugh. Not and you're only going to get one of them, but those two names. And obviously this could all change. I have no doubt that someone this year in college is going to come out of nowhere and end up being maybe a top 5 pick that we aren't even looking at right now, just based on their play this year. There are several guys that are, I talked about Andrew McAdory. He is now probably the offensive leader for Duke this year. Chris Kavanaugh is the leader of that Notre Dame offense. And that can work both ways. That can, I wouldn't be crazily surprised if a guy like Chris Kavanaugh slides back, because that team is not what the team was the last 2 seasons. They have graduated a lot of talent. And so even if Chris Kavanaugh is still as good as he is, I could see him sliding back just because that team isn't going to be as good, I think, as they have been the last 2 seasons. And that could ultimately kind of hurt him because of what they have been versus what they could be this year. So that could go both ways. But assuming that things play out the way that we think they will, the Cannons trading up for CJ Kirst or Chris Kavanaugh is certainly a possibility. I think, as we discussed when talking about Logan Wisnauskas, CJ Kirst plays on the left side. He's left-handed, and could be a very real option if they want to trade up. And in fact, could potentially be a better option than Logan Wisnauskas because he offers something slightly different than what Marcus Holman and Asher Knowlton offer, while also still being able to be that off-ball catch and shoot guy. He can kind of do everything. So those are kind of the 3 options. If pressed, I think I'm leaning slightly towards them just using the picks and not having to worry about trading with someone else. That being said, I would not be super surprised if they traded up and tried to grab someone, because again, they feel like they are super close to being a championship. I'd argue they are a championship caliber team. But if they traded up and got a CJ Kirst, they might be a championship favorite level team. And of course, right after the Pat Kavanaugh trade, the Water Dogs announced that they had re-signed Kieran McCardell, which is a great sign for the Philadelphia Water Dogs. Kieran McCardell is an incredible player who is, if not underrated, at least overlooked a lot at how good he is. And him and Michael Sowers have created one of the best partnerships in the entire league. Again, maybe an Asher Knowlton, Marcus Holman is maybe the top tier, but I'd have Marcus Holman, I'd have Michael Sowers and Kieran McCardell right there, 1A, 1B kind of thing. So then the question was, how does this impact their strategy, being that they hold the number 1 pick right now? And the most commonly thought of number 1 pick is CJ Kirst, and him and Kieran McCardell technically play the same position. I think it's important to remember that this was a team that went to back-to-back championships, and without really making any player personnel changes, drop down to the worst team in the league, earning that number 1 pick. And it can just as easily swing back the other way. I think this is a championship caliber roster if everyone is on the same page and pulling in the same direction. So there's definitely a debate to be had about what the best option for them is moving forward. I have seen a lot of debate about whether or not you pick best player or best fit. I'm not sure that in this draft those two are necessarily even mutually exclusive. But I would say that there is no Brennan O'Neill in this draft. Brennan O'Neill was one of those potential players. He looks like he could be the next kind of LeBron James of lacrosse. He still has some work to do to get there, but the best player versus best fit conversation looks very different in a year with a player like Brennan O'Neill, where the best player has such a high ceiling that if you can get him anywhere near it, it is a once in a generation kind of player, versus just about every other year where your best player and the second best player or the best fit, there isn't a huge gap between. I think this is one of those years. The gap between a CJ Kirst and a Chris Kavanaugh, or, even maybe even a Coulter Mackesy, Sam English kind of guy, the gap between those two isn't as big as it potentially was last year. I get Connor Schellenberger is also a great player, but we're talking about the difference in potential here. And Brennan O'Neill could be the guy that's breaking Paul Rabel's scoring record when it's all said and done, with the caveat that MLL records are going to be very tough to beat because they play less games and games are shorter and guys take less shots and score less goals and points and stuff. So that caveat being in place, Brennan O'Neill had that level of potential coming into the league last year. So then the question becomes, for me, what is Kieran McArdle's long-term plan? Because the rumors were that at the end of this past season, at the end of the 2024 season, he was likely to retire. So if I am Bill Tierney, I am getting on the phone with Kieran McArdle and I'm saying, what does your future look like? Are you one and doneing it? Even if you're not 100%, are we doing 1 year and then maybe next year, or maybe you retire? At which point there's a conversation about, do we pick Kieran McArdle's replacement? Even if this incoming season he plays somewhere else, we get him to stay, to learn from Kieran McArdle and say, have that wisdom passed down, moved on. Even again, like I said, even if he's not playing in that position next summer, we're getting him on the field somewhere and he's learning everything he can. And with the idea, almost like a backup quarterback, when you drafted Jordan Love while you have Aaron Rodgers, it won't be the same because we don't have that kind of second string where the guy's not playing. You need to have the guy on the field. So he'll be playing, but he can watch film with Kieran McArdle. They can talk. He can ask him questions. He can learn from him, with the idea that the next summer he takes that spot over. Or is Kieran McArdle looking at, man, I think I got 3 more years left, at which point maybe you say, hey, we're going to take the guy who fits our team right now, and we will worry about replacing Kieran McArdle down the line, or who is going to take that position in 2 or 3 years. There are lots of guys coming up. There are going to be even more guys coming up that will fill those roles better than maybe someone can this year. Like I said, this is, I think, a championship caliber roster. So they're designed to win now. This isn't the NFL where, the Panthers are this awful team and they're looking to rebuild so that they can be successful in 3 to 5 years. We're, again, like I said, we're talking about a team that went to back-to-back championships, and then with largely the same roster was the worst team in the league and could just as easily turn around and be the best team in the league next year. We just watch the Atlas do it, go from the worst team in the league to the best team in the league, at least through the regular season. Obviously, they didn't win a championship, but the margins in this league are that thin that it can easily turn around very quickly. So I think that it really kind of hinges on not just the fact that Kieran McArdle has re-signed for this year, it's what he's going to do next. Is he likely to stay with the team for another year or 2 more years or whatever, or is he looking at 1 more year and he's likely done? Because that would have a huge impact on where I would go with my number 1 draft pick. And finally, for all the Box fans, NLL training camps have officially started, and we're now about 3.5 weeks out from the start of the season on December 6th. I am really looking forward to the NLL season this year. I am trying to go all in, pick a team, and follow it through for the whole season. But unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to really talk about right now because, again, training camps have just kind of gotten under the way, and the NLL doesn't do an amazing job of kind of, walking you through training camp, at least not in the same way that the PLL does. Obviously, it's a different thing. They run the training camps very differently. Each team has their own versus, the PLL kind of has one big one. So it is a little bit different, but it is an area where I think the NLL could maybe get a little bit better and taking us along for the ride of training camp. But we will have more NLL as we get closer to the season and it officially gets started. But that is it for the first episode of The Runout. Thank you so much for tuning in. It really does mean the world to me, and I am so stoked to be kicking off this journey with you. I will see you guys next week.